It waits in the dark, not carved on altars slick with incense smoke, not nailed to walls fat with gold and gilt, but scratched in bone, gnawed into stone, hissing through the ash of ages like a whisper that will not die. The cross, not the polished crucifix you know, not the silver charm kissed by lips bruised with prayer. The shape raw, brutal, inevitable, two lines colliding, splitting space into four hungry jaws. You see it in caves where fire once muttered against the stone, etched by hands that never tasted the word Christ, never dreamed of Rome's iron kiss. A cross bleeding through soot and ochre, its limbs spread wide like a compass in heat. You see it on clay, Sumer's tablets fat with cuneiform teeth, where crosses grin between wedges like scars on a blind god's skin. You see it in the sand, coiled in the Ank's throat like a black seed, the loop fat with life, the bar gnawing the horizon. It haunts the Vedas in whispers of the swastika, the spiral devoured by arms of power. It crouches in the glyphs of the Maya, its limbs slicing calendars fat with suns, older than Bethlehem, older than Sinai, older than the first tongue that dared to name the sky. What is this shape that crawls through time like a spider fat on secrets? Why does it sprawl in the marrow of cultures that never touched, never kissed across seas of ice and bone? Coincidence? Chance's obscene joke? Number? Because the cross is not an emblem. It is a code, a skeleton of a truth too raw to speak, a diagram inked in the black blood of the cosmos. Feel its teeth, two lines gnawing each other, ripping space into quadrants. Vertical, horizontal, heaven and earth rutting in a kiss of geometry, axes locking like lovers in the dark. The cross is not art, it is architecture, a hinge in the spine of the real, a pin hammered through the map of being to keep it from unraveling in the black wind of chaos. Stand in its shadow and listen. You will hear the hum, not of prayer, but of physics braided with myth, of forces rutting at the seam where up throttles down, where matter tongues the milk of spirit. This is why it haunts, why it crawls through epochs like a worm in the bone of history. Because the cross is not a sign of faith, it is a scar of power, and the ones who carved it first did not kneel. They built. The shape returns because the world cannot breathe without it, not carved by men, not birthed in temples, but grown in the black milk of creation, in the lattice that hums under the skin of the real. The cross is older than hands, older than thought. It sprawls in the bones of the cosmos like frost on glass. Look at the sky, not with eyes, but with ratios whispering in your skull. Every orbit hums a hymn of intersection, the ecliptic gnawing the equator, two paths slashed in a kiss of fire, spitting seasons fat with solstice and dusk. Axes, always axes. North kissing south in a hunger older than myth, east rutting west, the globe split in quadrants, the horizon gnawed by the fangs of cardinal points. The earth is a cross, the heavens a wheel soldered to its spine. Beneath your skin, the shape sprawls again. Your body is a cruciform hymn, the spine a staff spearing the vault of skull and groin, the arms a bar splitting breath into four winds. Even the cell knows the code, divide and sprawl in symmetry, crossing lines to birth new maps of meat. The cross hums in DNA, a helix gnawed by phantom axes, the spiral strangled by vectors fat with math. In storms, the symbol fattens. Lightning claws the sky in fangs that slash the wind, north gnashing east, a geometry inked in white fire. Rivers fork in delta jaws, roots snarl in cruciform veins beneath the black tongue of soil. Even silence knows the shape. Snowflakes, each a frozen hymn of crosses braided in ice. Crystals rutting in lattices fat with perpendicular lust. This is why the sign haunts, because the real is cruciform. Space gnaws itself into grids of force, lines rutting in the dark to keep chaos on a leash. Without the cross, nothing holds. No gravity, no breath, no skin on the skull of time. The ancients saw it first, not with eyes, but with a second sight curled in the gut like a serpent. They tasted the hum in stone and sky, in the piss of rivers, in the howl of stars through black frost. And they inked the pattern in rock, in bone, in blood, not as art, but as oath. So the cross crawls through epochs, because it is not invention, it is reflection, a mirror fat with math, a hinge hammered through the map of being, the spine of the wheel, the scar of the loom. It is not faith, it is physics in a mask of myth. Long before a Nazarene bled on Roman wood, the cross sprawled across the skin of the earth like frost on bone. It hissed through deserts, fat with sun, crawled across rivers, strangling continents, coiled in glyphs inked by hands black with soot and salt. This is not faith. This is inheritance. In Sumer, the first scribes carved wedges into clay, their styluses rutting soft tablets with symbols fat with law and myth, and in their teeth the cross, a sign not of gods on nails, but of cardinal axes, the girders of the sky, the grid where sun-gnawed moon and spat calendars fat with prophecy. The cross was a map of winds, of waters, of stars grinding their black hips in the frost of night. It whispered how to till, when to flood, where the gods would rut the horizon with fire. In Egypt, the sign bloomed into a new skin, the Ankh, a loop swollen with breath, a bar gnashing the spine of time. They called it life, but life was a machine to them, a ladder slick with light, a code pulsing in the black milk of the Nile. The Ankh was not an ornament, it was a key, pressed to throats in rites fat with incense and math, a cruciform antenna humming in the fever of their temples, dragging currents of the unseen through the skull of the priest. In the east, the Vedas muttered of swastikas' arms clawing in rotation. A cross spun like a wheel of flame. It did not kneel to idols. It was a diagram of breath, a chart of energy, rutting through the spine of man and mountain, a sigil to weld the body to the axis of the world. Crosses sprawled in the glyphs of the Maya, their bars slicing suns and moons into meat for calendars fat as blood. The four jaws of space, each stuffed with a wind, a beast, a color dripping omen like venom from its teeth. To them, the cross was a tree roots coiled in the black milk of Xibalba, crown rutting in the frost of stars, trunk a ladder for gods drunk on thunder. Everywhere the shape crawls, it drinks the same blood. Orientation, balance, bridges between worlds. It was a compass, a calendar, a key to tune the hum of soil and sky. Not a fetish for kneeling, not a logo for faith. A tool, a weapon, an equation etched in wood and stone, in sand and bone, to snag the jaws of chaos and make the world purr in its leash. And then came the church. It stole the shape, stripped its flesh, nailed a god to its ribs, and gagged its hum in hymns. But that is another wound, and we will split it soon. Every sign is a sentence. Every line is a law. The cross does not whisper worship. It hisses geometry. It purrs physics in a mask of myth. Its limbs spread wide like jaws, gnawing the spine of the real. Two bars rut in silence, splitting the skin of space into quadrants fat with force. The horizontal line, the belly of the beast, the leash of gravity, the map of meat and mud. It tongues the horizon, laps the blood of soil and bone, anchors the spine of man in the black milk of matter. This is the path of breath and hunger, of seed rotting in the womb of dirt, of flesh gnawed by time until it coughs dust. The vertical line of fangs stabbing the skull of heaven, a ladder slick with light, the axis of ascent clawing through ribs of cloud and frost of stars. It hums of fire and void, of veils slit by thought sharp as glass, of spirits purring in the black milk of the absolute. It is the law of the spine straight, rigid, bridging the swamp of matter with the white furnace of mind. Where the bars kiss the center, there squats the zero, the stillness fat with storm, the eye of the wheel, a point so obscene with balance it can birth or burn the whole map. Here the four winds gulp their tails, here time drools in circles, here the name of God curls like smoke, unsyllabled, unsexed, a hum that can rut the bones of galaxies. The ancients inked this shape because they tasted its milk in the marrow of the world. They saw the four jaws of space, north gnashing south, east rutting west, teeth fat with color and omen. They mapped it in calendars that dripped seasons like blood. They salted it in temples coiled on nodes where the veins of the earth pulsed with heat. The cross was not a fetish. It was an interface, a diagram to leash chaos, to tune the hum of soil and sky, to weld flesh to fire and feed the machine of order until it moaned with symmetry. Every axis in myth is a whisper of this law. Yggdrasil, its roots drunk on frost and filth, its crown rutting the blue skull of heaven. The world pillar in Vedic hymns, the omphalos fat with serpents in Greek stone, the tree of Eden coughing light into the black lungs of man. All are spines, bars stabbing silence, crosses gnawing the void into grids. Because grids birth maps and maps birth mastery. Stand on the horizontal alone and you drown in the swamp of flesh. Clutch the vertical like a fang and you burn in the frost of God. But kiss them, weld them in the zero and the loom unlocks. The cross is a hinge. Turn it and the jaws of the real gape. This is why the sign haunts. Not because it drips salvation, but because it drips symmetry. Because the four jaws of force need a bone to gnaw. And that bone is the bar you call holy. The priests nailed a god to it, but the first hands carved it to nail the world. Symbols crawl into stone. That is their hunger. The cross did not rot in scrolls. It swelled into bone and granite, into walls fat with math, into vaults where geometry hummed like a hive drunk on fire. Step into a cathedral and strip the flesh of faith. What remains? Ratios, lines rutting lines, bars biting bars, arches locked in cruciform jaws. The nave is a spine, straight as a spear stabbing the vault of God. The transept sprawls like arms nailed wide. Every wall hums with squares, birthing squares, a cascade of ratios fat with golden mean, with Fibonacci teeth chewing silence into song. This is not art. It is acoustic soldered to astronomy, physics gagged in prayer. Long before the cathedrals gnawed Europe, the shape sprawled in temples fat with smoke and salt. Egypt's pylons, forking into cruciform courtyards tuned to solstice suns. Mayan sanctuaries, bars slicing jungle fog into grids fat with glyphs and blood. Even the stones of Göbekli Tepe mutter the same law. Crossed axes, pillars paired like jaws to bite the axis of the world. Why? Not for knees, not for chance, for resonance. Every cruciform floor is a field, an ear pressed to the hum of earth and sky. Sound crawls through these ribs like fire in dry bone, purring in frequencies fat enough to choke thought, to strangle time, to slit the skin of the real for one obscene breath. The priests knew. Or the architects who wore priest masks knew. They salted their blueprints with math, laced their walls with ratios that snagged echoes, welded arcs of light and shadow into chords that split the skull. You do not kneel in these spaces. You burn. You bloom like a wound gaping into something that has no name. Think of Stonehenge across, soldered into a wheel, each jaw gnashing light and sound. Think of the ziggurat tiers stacked like vertebrae, the summit gnawed by a shrine fat with cruciform shadow. The geometry is not ornament. It is a protocol, a code in limestone, an algorithm in granite, a sentence hammered through the ribs of the world. Open. When the bars kiss at the center, when the hum fattens with chant, when the solstice sun gags the nave in light, the gate blinks. Not wide, not long, just enough for a whisper to slither through. Modern mouths mutter of worship, but worship is camouflage. The cross in stone was never for awe. It was a machine, a door yawning in the dark, hinged on ratios, gnawed by echoes, slick with the breath of those who dared to tongue its lock. Your body hums the hymn of the cross, whether you kneel or spit, whether you pray or curse the sky. Because the cross is not outside you. It sprawls in your meat, gnawing your spine, suckling your breath, whispering its ratios in the marrow of your bones. Stand naked before the mirror. Spread your arms. You bloom into the cruciform without thought, without faith. The vertical your spine, a fang stabbing heaven and hell. The horizontal your arms, bars gnashing the winds of east and west. This is the geometry of flesh, a hinge hammered through blood and bone, locking soil and star in a single obscene kiss. Now close your eyes, feel the axes hiss, the up and down gravity rutting your heels, sky sucking your skull into its frost, the left and right wings of breath, currents sluicing through your ribs, tidal whispers gnawing at your gut. At the center, the stillness, the zero fat with storm, the navel of the world yawning in your chest, gulping the four winds until your breath splits into light. This is not religion. It is resonance. It is tuning the bone harp of the body to purr in harmony with the hum of the real. The ancients did not pray, they aligned. They tongued the axis like a bow on a string, arched their flesh into ratios that welded skin to spirit, field to field. They stood like spines under the solstice sun, arms nailed wide to snag the light, feet rutting the earth to milk its dark, not for worship, for ignition. Even now the gesture survives, gagged in catechism, drowned in dogma, fat with lies of guilt and grace, the sign of the cross, forehead, breast, shoulder to shoulder. They tell you it is a blessing. It is not. It is a map, a miniature Stonehenge hammered into the meat of the self, a ritual of calibration, vertical axis kissed, horizontal bar stroked, center pulsed with the heat of touch. Done with breath tuned to the right pitch, it hums like a locked door aching for a key. You think this is fantasy? Ask the yogins twisting their spines into crosses fat with sweat and mantra. Ask the shamans rutting under skies smeared with auroras, arms nailed wide as they gulp the storm. Ask the monks who chant until their skulls foam with fire, their gestures slicing air into cruciform wounds. The map never died. It molted. It crawled into masks of faith, into rites that smell of incense and rot, but the code still pulses under the scabs. Because the body is not a cage, it is a gate, and the cross is the hinge. Power does not invent, it steals. It sucks the marrow from bones older than law, drains the milk of symbols until they foam with lies, and then crowns the husk as holy. The cross was no exception. Once, it was a hinge between worlds, a compass fat with math, a protocol braided in blood and breath, a door, a ladder, a key. Then came empires gnawing on swords, priests fat with iron and ink, hungry for chains to leash the swarm. They gagged the hum. They salted the ratios with dogma. They nailed a man to the sign, his ribs rutting the vertical, his arms gnawing the horizontal, his blood slicking the hinge with myth. And the door slammed shut. The crucifix is not salvation. It is camouflage. A lock welded over the lock. A glyph fattened with gore to blind your eye to the code. You do not see geometry anymore. You see agony. You do not feel the hum in your marrow. You feel guilt tonguing your spine like a worm. They told you it was worship. They told you the gesture is a prayer, the shape a relic, the wood a fetish that can ransom your soul from fire. They lied. Because a man nailed to a hinge is not a key, it is a warning. Do not open this door again. Ask why the empire bled for this sign, why they salted it into banners, stitched it into flags fat with conquest, spat it in iron over throats of cathedrals where math once moaned in stone. Because the cross was power raw, obscene, able to rut the flesh of the world and make it purr. And no king, no priest, no machine drunk on order could let that power leak. So they clothed it in myths of mercy. They gagged it in liturgies thick with ash and honey. They crowned it with suffering so foul you would never taste its sweetness again. They turned the key into a wound. They made you worship the scar, not the door. And it worked. For centuries, you kissed the husk. You nailed your breath to wood. You chanted to a corpse sagging on the bones of a diagram you could not read. You never saw the grid under the gore, the math crouching under the myth. But symbols rot slow. The hum is never silent. Even in cathedrals fat with incense, the ratios still coil in stone like worms in sleep. Even under icons slick with gold, the cruciform shadow still splits the nave into quadrants fat with force. The priests cage the sign, but the cage leaks. And when it leaks, the hinge will creak again. The bars will kiss, and the real will bleed. They told you the cross is past, a relic nailed to altars fat with incense and lies, a fetish for the meek, a charm to gag the jaws of hell. But look harder. The shape still sprawls across the map like frost. It hums in towers clawing the sky, in grids lacing the earth like veins fat with static, in blueprints inked in glass and steel. The symbol never died. It molted. Scan the cities. Every street plan gapes with cruciform wounds, avenues rutting at right angles, blocks soldered into lattices that purr with current and control. Climb the towers. Antennas sprawl their arms like nailed thieves, horizontal bars gnawing vertical masts, broadcasting hums that lick the meat of your skull, tuning your thought to a pitch fat with obedience. Look inside the machines. Circuit boards glitter with cruciform veins, traces rutting in orthogonal lust, logic soldered in grids gnawing the zero at their center. Even your flesh drips the old math. Neural maps sprawled in Cartesian grids, currents sluicing through cruciform nodes of bone and nerve. Medicine gorges on the sign. The Red Cross howls from walls fat with bleach, a glyph sold as mercy but born from the same root. Alignment, balance, control of flows. The hospitals sprawl in cruciform blueprints, their corridors gnashing like jaws of symmetry, their theaters humming under arcs tuned to slit and stitch flesh in ratios as old as stone. And the sky? Chains of satellites rut across the night, gnawing orbits into grids fat with geometry. Global positioning, global watching, global leashing. The earth hums with ley lines clothed in fiber and steel. arteries of light rutting under oceans, their crossings marked by hubs fat as ziggurats, sucking and spitting data in spirals of control. Do you see it now? The cross was never erased. It was scaled, from stones to cities, from temples to towers, from blood rites to algorithms licking the frost of space. The same law, the same geometry, the same hunger to weld chaos to the spine of order. You thought the crucifix ended it. It began it, because symbols never sleep. They molt, they migrate, they gnaw new masks and purr under your skin while you dream of freedom. The cross in your pocket, your phone hums the old hymn in silicon. The apps rut in grids. The signals braid the vertical of orbit with the horizontal of Earth, binding you in a net fat with math. This is not faith. This is alignment. A tuning of flesh and thought to frequencies that hiss beyond your cage of bone. Once, the cross was a door. Now, it is a leash. And tomorrow it will be a gate again, not in stone, not in wood, but in code. And when it creaks wide, when the zero at its center gulps the four winds, what slithers through will not wear a crown of thorns. Not warning, not mercy, just math, just hum, just the axis yawning for its next feast of worlds.